While the Atlantic is currently on the more hostile side, as we continue through this somewhat suppressed phase of the Madden-Julian oscillation, models, especially in the mid to long range, the sub-seasonal models I'll walk you through for this tropical update, are looking a little spicy, especially after we get past that fateful 9/11 anniversary. Welcome back to the Weather Center. Thank you so much for taking some time out of your Friday to join me here in the Weather Center. Happy Friday to those of you tuning in today. I have all the latest on the tropics to include our current area of interest, couple other spots I'm watching in real time, and what's coming down the pike over the next 10 to 15 days. All the latest coming right at you. If you are brand new to the channel, it would mean the world to all of us in the Weather Center community if you kindly consider clicking that subscribe button. Let's all take a second, give that like button a little nudge. We're going to want this information to get out there along the YouTube waves, start spreading out to those you believe would benefit from it, and I need your help to do that. Drop me a comment in the comment section down below. Let me know if you have any questions, comments, or concerns, wherever it is you're tuning in from, or if you just want to say hello. And let's also remember to share this information with those you believe would, in fact, benefit from it. I'm going to keep it as reliable, timely, accurate, and realistic as I can. And with all that being said, housekeeping out of the way, let's rock in. So this is National Hurricane Center's homepage. Since the last time we met, we had Tropical Storm Fernan hanging out in the upper latitudes of the Atlantic. Since then, Fernan has dissipated, now wrapped back up in the jet stream flow over the North Atlantic, rocketing towards Europe. And we have this, a new area of interest out there marked at a 30% shot at development over the next 7 days. Based on this afternoon and early morning's model runs, the 0Z and the 12 Zulu runs from today, in the last couple of runs since we last met on Wednesday, I'm very confident that the 7-day chances for this wave are going to continue to go up. We haven't had anything come off of Africa just yet, but I'll show you the North Africa satellite imagery showing you where that healthy tropical wave is, despite the MJO now being in phases 4, 5, getting into 6. We'll also talk a little bit about that, and as it wraps around to the more favorable positioning for the Atlantic season, this does seem like it has an attempt at developing. The question is, for how long? General agreement seems to suggest this will be at least a short-lived tropical storm. The next name on the list is Gabrielle. From there, we've got a couple of hurdles to overcome in the overall Atlantic weather pattern. I'll show you that on the water vapor satellite as well, to include something coming down the road on the eastern side of our subtropical ridge over the central Atlantic, a la your wave breaking. Those waves that crash over top the subtropical ridge, dumping dry air and additional wind shear into the tropics, nuking almost anything that may try to get going. Models are very wishy-washy with this. Our pattern is adjusting. We've got the unseasonable cool weather over the eastern United States. The jet is dipping down over the southeast U.S. and then back up rapidly over North Atlantic. And as a result, things are kind of in a state of flux. They're changing, they're evolving, and we're going to watch it real time, and I'm going to communicate that to the best of my ability to you all. I'm also watching the next strong cold front that's going to plop itself off the southeast coastline of South Carolina, Georgia, and the Florida East Coast, and over the eastern Gulf. Ensemble support for at least an area of low pressure is growing. We'll have to give it a couple more days to see whether or not this has the ability to take on more tropical, if not subtropical, characteristics. Now, looking at your water vapor satellite shot, let me get my face out of the way so we can kind of dive in here and dissect it. We're zoomed in, and this is intentional. First and foremost, let's start left to right and work our way towards Africa. Look at this rockin' jet stream deep over the southeast. It's exiting south of the mid-Atlantic states up there. It is now right over top upper portions of Florida, running parallel to the Gulf Coast of Louisiana, Mississippi, and Alabama. And that's what's also helping to produce some pretty significant rainfalls out here in central and northern Florida. And it looks like for my friends out there in the New Orleans, Baton Rouge area, you're also getting in on some thunderstorm action this afternoon in response to that approaching shortwave trough being pushed down by the jet. You can kind of see it in those vibrant shades of yellow just to the north of where all that moisture is streaming in. And because of our sea breeze interaction here in central Florida, the east coast breeze trying to sneak in under the radar in the low levels of the environment, we have the chance for some very gusty winds, if not some isolated severe weather we're going to continue to track for you through the weekend, your Labor Day weekend. Then, as we traverse the Atlantic, we have not one, not two, not even three, but four upper level lows just slowly stepping through the central and southern Atlantic pattern. This is what's preventing a lot of activity from getting going. And as we wait for the waves to break once again over our subtropical ridge, it's kind of hard to see. The jet rides back up towards the apex of the ridge off screen here, and then comes back down the front side of it where that upper low is now coming down like a bowling ball off the coast of Spain, Portugal, and northwest Africa. As we get another dump of dry continental air. And believe it or not, I've been doing some research on this. This is actually the focal point for the transition between stratospheric air above where we observe our weather down into the layer of the atmosphere where we do. We'll talk about that in a separate video. I'm not going to lose you all. Basically, you take very stable, dry air and you dump it in the tropics. And what's supposed to happen is you cycle that back up towards the north, a la tropical features. You see where I'm going with this? Again, we'll talk about that at a later date and time. The question is, once a Kelvin wave moves through the pattern, it's over the East Pacific right now, giving them their next batch of named storms. I believe we have Invest 93E currently active, code red out there in the Eastern Pacific, ready to take on the K letter stormed out there. That'll be coming momentarily. As that meanders across the tropics, moving west to east, will that help to clean up the pattern a little bit, or will we stay fairly hostile for the first 10 or so days of September? Now, coming across to where we have our Africa satellite. This is the tropical wave in question. Very powerful looking MCS feature with a little bit of spin as well, moving along with that African easterly jet that comes screaming east to west out of the Pacific, or I should say the Indian Ocean, through the boot of Saudi Arabia, and then across interior portions of Africa. As that moves across, it's expected to splash down very late Sunday, if not Monday morning at the very latest. That's when it does seem like we're going to have enough oomph behind this thing, and at least leftover moisture favorable enough for this thing to try to spin into an area of low pressure and take on a weak tropical storm status. The Euro and the GFS today give it a better vote of confidence than that, but they're still sorting out what the extended range of the life cycle of this feature looks like. And now as we move over to our tropical probabilities, I want to show you multiple things that I'm watching. So within 4 days, notice we have a signal here right off the immediate United States coast, and then here comes that tropical wave. This is valid Monday going into Tuesday morning, Tuesday at 8 a.m., which lines up perfectly with what we just examined over on the satellite image. You go to about 5 days out, and notice we're still seeing both of these areas creeping up in terms of their probabilities. Now, again, working left to right, for the United States coast, I am far from sold that we're going to see anything tropical spin up. Could we get a pretty broad area of low pressure still attached to the frontal boundary that's working its way south? Absolutely. And is it going to throw widespread rain and thunderstorms for many of us up the East Coast and especially through the Southeast during the Labor Day weekend into the first half of next week? Yeah. So the impacts are there. We're still going to have to give it a couple more days to decipher if this has the capabilities of taking on that core thunderstorm structure that we look for at the tail end of these dissipating or dissolving frontal boundaries. So we'll give it a little more time, but regardless, the signal is there, and I have my eye on it. Then over the deep tropics southwest of the Cabo Verde Islands, which is key. I want to emphasize that. It is key. Earlier model runs since Tuesday, Wednesday when I shot my last update, now into Thursday, have this trending more south and west in its trajectory, which could help us to escape some of the detriments that lie in wait for this feature as it moves westward through the Atlantic. We're talking about the wave breaking, dumping dry air into the eastern MDR, as well as an extension of a TUT. Remember those positive vorticity streamers I've mentioned, and I can show you that in the model data momentarily, but they're filament kind of like ribbons in the upper level pattern that drape back towards the southwest across the Atlantic and produce additional wind shear that tear these things apart. So I'll have to wait and see what happens with that. The models are still trying to decipher the pattern. And then I'll quickly fast forward to day 10 because I want you to notice something. And I want you to look down in a very similar spot. This only goes out to 240 hours. But what have we talked about the last couple of tropical updates? Well, you'll see. Stick with me to the end. We're finally starting to see you know what. The CAG signaling down there. So here come our ensembles. I'll go ahead and pull you over to the Euro ensembles first so we can take a look at all three of these signals. So as I go quickly through the loop, we'll go out to 72 hours at first. Notice right off the immediate southeast coastline, we have a pretty good handful of individual members showing either a broad circulation or even something as intense as a tropical storm, or the equivalent of the intensity of a tropical storm off the southeast United States coast, with a couple of low-pressure pockets even trying to develop to the west of Florida. Not sold on that. If anything does try to organize, it'll probably be off the east coast again, although the icon, the German model, favors the west coast. It's a lot of energy down there. There's a lot of rotation, a lot of hot water in the low levels, plenty of moisture, and we've got the lift, the nudge from that upper trough that's dug in over the eastern U.S. Then if you turn your attention out east, you can see we have trended more south and west with our batch of ensemble members with that area of interest marked for 30% currently. As we go further through time, I'm going to time jump it, okay? So blink and you'll miss it. You time jump it out, and you can see that most of the members that stay towards the south of 20 degrees north latitude, survive. There is a tut, an extension of that wave breaking. You kind of see it right there. See how there's low pressure digging south to the upper right-hand corner? I know these ensembles are not the greatest for depicting that. I'm going to draw it in for you. But that tells me we have a low pressure attached to the jet. And as that continues to work its way south and east, we have that tut extending out like so. And around that, we have all that increased wind shear. So the further south these members can stay, kind of duck under it ever so slightly, bobbing and weaving like the punches in the boxing ring, we have a higher chance of surviving our track west. Then finally, as we rapidly fast forward towards the end of the loop, look down there near the Yucatan. Yeah, that's a very familiar sight in the Bay of Campeche, in the westernmost Caribbean, near the Yucatan Peninsula, Belize, and the Cayman Islands. We're going to be watching that very closely, especially whether or not something tries to build up on the east side of the peninsula or in the Bay of Campeche, but the Global Tropics Hazards Outlook from Climate Prediction Center also has this. And then back towards the east, we have a healthy signal of 1 and 2 tropical waves out in the MDR. You can also see this when you look over at your GFS ensembles. Now, I know that I have it zoomed in. I will openly admit the signal for the wave out in the Atlantic is not the greatest. The GFS does have that PVS, that streamer of vorticity and shear that extends through the central Atlantic, kind of stopping this thing in its tracks, but it does develop it. Again, the big question is intensity, and will it be a short or a longer-lived system? But if you fast forward towards the end of the GFS ensembles, look at that. We start to really come up to a bit of a slow boil down there in a very fateful spot. The same thing with the Canadian ensembles. Once you get about days 10, 11, and 12, things begin to slightly percolate until finally, as we get past, there's the date. Look at the top right-hand corner, September 11th. That's when we start to really identify those ensemble members pinging on that area of low pressure, and a couple of ensemble members try to sneak on out of there. Very weak signal. It just gives me somewhere to keep my eyes on, because now we're starting to see from nothing, there's a little something, and that's how it always starts, and it takes its course and matures from there. And this is right around the date and time I've been pinpointing for you all for a while now. Now, let's talk big picture. We're in a suppressed phase, a sinking phase, a stable phase of the MJO. Because of all the catching up we've had to do in terms of our sea surface temperatures and the coupling that we will usually see between the ocean and the atmosphere. Think of it this way, and I used this example at work earlier today. Say your power goes out at home. Even upon restoration, the power company cranks your power back on, you're good to go. AC's rocking, funny I mentioned that. But your Wi-Fi, the router, or the modem, it typically takes an extra 30 seconds, maybe even a full minute, before it finally reconnects. Same principle when it comes to talking about the ocean and atmosphere relationship. During the first 5-6 months of this calendar year, if you all recall, we were saying the season's a bust. I wasn't, but that was the general song and dance. Season's going to be canceled because we have cooler than average waters everywhere where it matters. We have flipped that around. We now have that positive AMO, just that typical looking horseshoe shape with cooler water towards the north and west and warm water that's embedded all across the tropics from the Gulf to the coast of Africa. So we flipped that around, but remember, that's the power source for your tropical cyclones. So we turned the power back on, and now we're waiting for the atmosphere, the Wi-Fi connection. See what I did there? The connection between the ocean and the atmosphere to come back in sync. And then we'll see as we go through September and especially October and the first couple weeks of November if it's going to kick on. You can see in the next 15 days as that Kelvin wave meanders through the pattern right in through there, we're going to shut down for just a brief stint. I'm calling it a stint. We're not going to see a total shutdown because we're also fighting peak season climatology. We're just naturally better off now than we are in late October, November, or the comparison to June and July. We're just naturally supposed to see tropical action down there, especially since we do have the warmer than average waters across the basin, and we are still continuing to warm. When you look at the next 46 days, and this just updated earlier this morning, there's the Kelvin wave, there's that brief pocket of sinking that tries to return, and then again, I've said it several times, we may be looking at a period to where we just have to constantly, without releasing, hold on to your butts, because you can see for the most part, when you look at the control member of the Euro velocity anomalies, we are predominantly favorable all the way through to the second week of October. When you switch over to the actual mean ensemble, which is what the most likely outcome is, when you look at a consolidated analysis of all the individual members, it paints an even more vivid picture of that. Kelvin wave, brief stint, like I've said, of maybe a week suppression in our pattern, and then bam, right after that fateful September 11th. So I am dug in, I'm digging my heels in, and I'm rocking in the trenches with you all watching right now. That is the date and time frame I have jotted down in my notes, and you should as well, because I think that's when we're really going to realize what the 2025 hurricane season has in store for us. You can also see that with the latest run of the CFS. Let me rewind it to the beginning. Spoiler alert, like I always do. There's that suppressed phase starting to work its way out. You can see the greatest amount of sinking in those deep shades of red and brownish colors over to the West African coast and through the MDR. As soon as we bypass that and extend the dates out to September 12th, this is the 5th through the 12th, now we're starting to see the phasing of the MJO coming across. This is the bona fide MJO, not the weak pulse that we were tracking on the velocity chart there. Then finally from the 12th through to the 19th, here we go with the giant arrows. You're going to see a lot of those thumbnails probably, but here we go. MJO is finally back into its favorable phasings, 1 and 2. 3 arguably kind of optimal. We're going to be hanging out there for a little bit as we run the clock even further out, looking from the 19th through the 26th. Still hanging with us, and then even into the early periphery of October, the sinking biases the Eastern and Central Pacific, so the Atlantic Basin will still want to rock and roll if this verifies and holds true, and then finally we'll have to rotate back around. There could be some weak impulses in the pattern to stimulate a couple things closer to the Caribbean and the United States coast as we get through the midsections of October, but by then the CFS says we'll slowly start to quiet down a little bit. And then before we wrap up, I wanted to talk on this real quick. With the MJO blasting the Western Pacific right now, we've got a lot of systemic cooling occurring in the ENSO regions. If you take a look at the Pacific tropical basin here, you can see from the 4 region all the way furthest to the left of that cool tongue, all the way towards the coast of South America, we've got some deep cooling going on. Some very deep cooling going on. And that's, I think, precisely why the Euro ensembles here on the actual ECMWF website are showing that there is definitely the potential that we are going to be rocking and rolling through the month of September, especially after we get past the first 10 to 12 days. And you could see those simultaneous signals showing up, MDR waves coming off of Africa, and then on the left-hand side, you can see that the Bay of Campeche and the Western Caribbean start to percolate as well, with a bit of a weak homegrown signal there. So like we've been advertising since the very beginning of the calendar year, if you've stuck with me, we've been mentioning that late in the hurricane season, not only could it potentially be backloaded once again, but it looks like a mixed bag of a variety of things that are going to have us working overtime. So, key takeaway here is we're not quite there yet. Catchphrase, famous last words for this hurricane season, give it a little more time. We did that during the first month or some change. Then we popped off Aaron, a little bit of action out there until Aaron distorted the pattern. Remember, it wasn't like August was a dead dud. Okay, Aaron decided to be a very stubborn hurricane and evolve during the course of it traveling up the eastern United States, and that's why we're kind of in this dumped phase right now. We've ripped apart the pattern, and we're in a very anomalous stage, and we're slowly working back to normal, and the MJO is going to give us that little nudge to do so. So we're going to have the MJO in the upper levels, and then we have the thermodynamics, the warm water anomalies, and the configuration out there also helping to increase those rising motions. So thank you all for tuning in today. I hope you've had a fantastic week, a little better than I have. It's been a good week for me, but I'm very tired. My schedule has been all over the place. I'm shooting this video much later than I would have liked, and I'm running on maybe 3 hours of sleep, and I got to get back up early in the morning around 1:30 to head over to the news studio for our morning newscasts on TV. So if you have the weather app, definitely check me out. Give us a watch or kind of watch on replay. But for those of you watching here on YouTube, I sincerely thank you for those of you who have been showing such generous support and following along as we've gotten closer to the peak of the hurricane season. Going to try to find an opportunity to stream this weekend, especially if we continue to trend towards these active periods that we're looking at for the month of September. And to be determined, I'll make sure to make an announcement, let you know when that's going to be happening. But have a beautiful Labor Day weekend. If I don't see you, you will. You probably will, but either way, wishing you all the best, and we'll talk again soon. But until then, this is Wxcenter Nazario, signing out.